All right. Well, hey, y'all. Thanks so much for coming to my talk. I have worked in detection and response for the last 10 years, and I've made a lot of mistakes, but especially when it comes to metrics. And this is the talk I wish I had seen. Today, you'll get three things. You'll get a new maturity model that'll help you describe and measure your detection and response capabilities. You'll get a framework that'll help you build new metrics, and you'll get lots of examples. And my story with metrics starts on a Monday morning. I'm only a few months into a new job, and I get a message from my boss. He's like, the board of director meeting's coming up. Looking for those updated program metrics. You can see I'm new to senior leadership based on this text thread. I don't ask any questions. I'm eager to please. Got it, boss. So I send the message to my new team, and I ask them, hey, what have we presented in the past? And what's the response? Oh no, bad news. The last guy just made those up. But good news, I'm going to do so much better. And how many of you have had this happen, where these are the metrics that you start with? It's our starting place. Generally, they're metrics that haven't been well thought out, or they've been fudged so that we can avoid new questions. So I did what you probably did. I Googled it, or I Binged it, whatever is appropriate for this room. I DuckDuckGo'd it, yeah. And then I just ended up copying the metrics I used at my last job. And that's led me to using a lot of bad metrics. But so what? Why should we care about metrics? I know, you tell me. It's 9 a.m. You came to a talk about metrics. Why do you care about metrics?
I want them to tell me a story.
OK. You want me to tell you a story?
That's how you get budgeted for more staff.
Yeah, that's how you get budget for new staff.
You need to know how your business is doing.
How's the business doing?
Mark Trend.
What's that?
Trend.
Trends. Find trends. Yeah.
Measure the effectiveness of your controls, too.
Measure effectiveness of controls. Yeah, yeah. Yeah. Metrics help drive improvement. Carl Pearson, he's a late 1800s, 1900s guy, founder of modern statistics. He's got this quote he's famous for, that if you ever write a talk about metrics, it'll be in your Google search. That which is measured improves. And when I first read it, I was like, what a great plug for metrics. But there's an implied warning in that message. What if you're measuring the wrong thing? There's also a paper that these two guys out of MIT, Hauser and Katz, wrote. It's called Metrics, You Are What You Measure. And they talk about the more you pay attention to your metrics, the more you start to make decisions and take actions to improve those metrics. The metrics you choose, those are the ones you'll improve. And then you'll become what you measure. Metrics also help us communicate what we do and why people should care. Edward Tufte, he teaches this really great course on presenting data. If you ever want to take a course about visualizing data, it's not a security class. It's not even a technology class. It's just about visualizing data. It's one of the best courses by Edward Tufte. Look him up. But he's got a quote that says, metrics reveal data. Metrics are a tool that enable us to present the greatest number of ideas in the shortest time with the least ink in the smallest space. He's much more well-spoken than I. And why? Well, let's be honest, because we need a budget. We need headcount. And metrics are usually the tool we need to communicate with that. But why are security metrics hard? Why are security metrics hard? The landscape changes.
People aren't attacking 100% of the time.
People aren't attacking 100% of the time.
Security is hard.
Security is hard. In my personal experience, security metrics are hard because I'm a security person, and I don't care that much about metrics. Here's a much less famous quote. Metrics are an annoying PowerPoint I need to update every month. That one's from me. A bit about me. I'm a senior staff engineer at Airbnb. I work on fun things, not metrics, like enterprise security, threat detection, and incident response. And I really love my job. I live in Austin, Texas with my wife and my 3-year-old son, Liam. And I really love being a dad and a husband. And there's one thing that I'm really good at as a husband, as a dad, and as a security engineer. I'm really good at making mistakes. And this is the point of the talk when I'm supposed to gain credibility with all of you. Tell you about my accolades, my years of experience, but really, I've just been making mistakes. So let me tell you about 5 of them. And the first mistake I've made is losing sight of the goal. How many of you work or do work the alert queue? Some kind of triage. Who here is on call? Who's on call right now? Yeah, all right. Those are the tired people in the room. This is my 10-year anniversary of being on call. It's a short amount of time, I suppose, but. And for those of us that spend our days triaging alerts and responding to fires, it can be really easy to lose sight of the goal. And so we end up describing our frontline operational work with metrics like this one. And here's a metric that shows the number of security alerts per month. You've seen this metric. You probably have this metric. And if you take a closer look, we see that in the past year, it looks like March and April had the most alerts. My boss will ask a question about that. And if we keep looking at it, the alerts are generally trending down. Did we do that? Or did we stop logging something in February? Did the new IPS rules come out and I was like, nope, and I just turned them off? Alert count has become the heartbeat metric for security operations. Instead of rooting back to our goal of detecting threats and responding quickly, we've reduced ourselves to cries for help. I've come to call this metric the operational burden we've inflicted on ourselves. Another title might be, we're doing things. It's crazy out there. Maybe it's fear-driven, scare leadership with a bunch of alert volume. And sometimes we try to make it a bit better. We break it down by true and false positives. I've been proud of myself for doing this. But if I'm honest, I'm not really sure what I was trying to say with this metric either. That we have a lot of false positives. So what's a good true to false positive ratio? Is it the same for every alert type? Would reducing the false positives mean I have less visibility into threats? Or is having too many false positives saying I'm missing true positives? And the first problem I'm running into is I don't know where to start with metrics. Detection and response has matured as a field, but I'm stuck here making metrics about alert volume. So I need a starting place. And so to give you a starting place, I thought about what in detection and response could we measure to help us make decisions and see if we're improving. And you can remember these by the acronym SAVER. And we want to show that we're streamlining. Our operations are improving our efficiency and accuracy through either automation, better tooling, or processes. And we want to raise awareness about what we're learning from our threat intel, sharing things like threats and trends that we should be prepared for. And we want to measure our vigilance. How are we preparing for the top threats? Can we detect them? And as we learn about new threats and trends, how is that guiding our threat hunts? As we explore networks, what are we finding? And when our detections fire and our threat hunts turn into incidents, what's our readiness? How quickly are we able to organize and respond to incidents? How complete are our playbooks? So when you're thinking about your own metrics, specifically in detection response, think about these different categories that your metric might fall under. And this can help you tie it back to the outcome. What's the goal? And then to figure out what category a metric should fall under, ask yourself, what question does this metric answer? So what question were we trying to answer with this metric? Are false positives taking up too much of our time? Do we have enough time to investigate the true positives completely? And then another question you can ask is, how do I control this metric? How do I reduce false positives? How do I reduce false positives? But like me, security engineer, how do I decrease false positives? Tuning, turning them off. So how's that going for y'all? Yeah, that's right. So if I map this into my saver category, I think about this. This should be a streamlined metric. And streamlined metrics usually answer questions about efficiency, accuracy, automation, but it's about time. And I have two big problems with this metric. This metric doesn't tell me where I'm spending most of my time. You might think it does, but it doesn't. And second, the only control I have to reduce or to make this graph better, to make this metric better, is what? Turning off tuning? That's it. That's all I've got. So let's make it a little better. And here's a graph of time spent on false positives. And I've completely removed true positives right now, because for right now, I'm OK to say true positives, spend as much time as we need. But instead of tracking how many false positives there are, I'm tracking how much time we're spending on them. Now, how much time you spend on an alert manually, that could be as simple as measuring the time it's assigned and the time that it's closed as a false positive. Now, if your team is anything like mine, we have this really amazing habit where when the alerts are coming in, we select them all and assign them to ourselves, whether we're going to work on them right then or not. And why do we do that? What metric is making us do that? Time to assigned. Time that it was acknowledged. When you think about your metrics, think about what human behavior you're encouraging and how you are going to hack that metric. Because that's what we do. We're going to find a way to hack the metric. And so the way that we're hacking the metric of time to acknowledge or time to assigned is not helping us. It's not making things better. So stop measuring it, at least temporarily. And then this metric suddenly becomes a lot more accurate. So how do we control this metric? What can we do to improve this metric? How much time we're manually spending on our analysis, on our response for false positives? Well, what about automation? And as we get more automation tools, the number of events no longer equates to how much time we're spending on false positives. You could have an alert that is firing like crazy, but no one ever has to look at it because automation's doing all the work. So do you care? I don't. If I don't have to do anything, I don't care. And as you automate it, then you can carry the time that you're spending on those alerts and put it into your automation. And this lets you do something really cool. Then you can actually speak to the amount of hours, the amount of human hours your automation efforts are saving you. So now, maybe you'll prioritize doing automation, which we often don't end up doing. We often don't take the time to do that we should. Now, somebody might look at this and go, your automations suck. They're taking that long to run. No, you're carrying the time you spent manually to do something into automated. So now you're not just incentivized to tune alerts, you're incentivized to find where's the most manual time I'm spending so that I can automate it. Second mistake. Second mistake is using quantities that lack controls, or more simply said, measuring things you can't change. Mean time to recover is a classic incident response metric. It'll be in your DuckDuckGo search. In this example, you can see that recovery was lower in September and October, but then it grew in November and December. But then, man, the team pulled together. We got things in gear here, and then we got our response time down. Or maybe December, there's holidays, and people weren't acknowledging their pages, and yeah. And it's funny, I've spent the last year researching metrics for detection and response, and I've learned something. We're really obsessed with speed in incident response. The vast majority of metrics when I search for detection and response is about time. Time to detect, time to respond, time to contain, time to recover. And I'm certainly not going to argue that speed is not important, but using time as our sole measurement across all incident phases completely ignores quality and effectiveness. But that's right. But my big problem with this metric is that security incidents have a lot of variability, especially the further the downstream you get in that response process. A lot of dependencies, a lot of teams come into the picture, and you can't control all those things. So a graph like this, it doesn't help me make decisions because I don't know what's controllable here. And so what happens when you have a metric that you can't control? You stop caring about it because you can't affect it. So instead, break out your response times across all your different phases. And here, I've filtered out all of the built-in time that I know I'll need for quality. You have an idea with your playbooks how long that playbook will take for specific types of incidents. And every response playbook you have has some expected built-in time. Sure, as you mature your capabilities, that built-in time will come down. But that's not what this focus is for this graph. Here we're looking at what can I control today? Eric Brandwein at AWS, he gives this really good talk. It's called The Tension Between Absolutes and Ambiguity in Security. And in it, he says, when you look at a metric, it should immediately answer, what do you want from me? What do you want me to do? And one of the easiest ways to do that is by making the answer 0 if there's nothing to do. So here I've filtered out all the time we can't reduce right now. There's nothing for me to do right now. I can't do anything about it. I've made the answer 0. So now when I look at these metrics, I know exactly what it wants from me. Go look at the incidents in December, figure out what happened in the remediation phase. Mistake number 3, thinking proxy metrics are bad. Or more simply, taking your brain and thinking about amazing metrics you could build that are insanely expensive to create when all you really needed was a correlating metric that was good enough. Here's a great example. 8 years ago, my team and I decided that we wanted to know what our MITRE attack coverage was. So all the different techniques across the entire attack framework. I see some nodding heads like, yep, oh yeah, I know where this is going. And this was before MITRE attack coverage was like the really cool thing to do. And so we just figured out, all right, we're going to have to write tests across the entire framework, some kind of simulation for each one. And then we got going, and we figured, OK, all right, one test per technique, that's not going to tell us much. We're going to need a lot. And then we got Windows, Mac, and Linux. Yeah, we're going to need a lot for all of those. And so after years of developing tests, investing in tooling, we finally had the data we needed to visualize our attack detection coverage. Side note, I saw this tweet the other day, and it said, we need to do a better job of mocking vendors that claim 100% MITRE attack coverage. For many reasons. But most importantly, I've seen the carnage of 100% coverage, quote unquote. It's fatigue, alert fatigue like you wouldn't believe. So anyway, we spent years putting this data together. And it is cool, don't get me wrong. But at the end of the day, all we really wanted to know was, what detections should I be building next? So do this instead. Rather than trying to measure your detection coverage across the entire attack matrix, start by finding top 5 threats that you care about the most. Don't overthink it. Look at your external threat intel. What kind of industry are you in? What kind of environment do you have? And then what are your incident trends? What kind of incidents do you have that are just reoccurring? And then link those back to your organization's security risks. What would be a really, really bad day for your company? If data was exfiltrated, what would make the chief privacy officer cry the most? That's a good metric, by the way. And then once you have those top 5, prioritize your detection development from there. So we like to workshop these as a team, where everyone takes one of those top 5 threats, or you go in the groups of top 5 threats, and then use attack to then derive the different techniques and sub-techniques from there. And then, as you write tests and detections, you will, over time, slowly end up building yourself a prioritized MITRE attack coverage map, but without all the alert fatigue and a super costly metric. And then you might also become best friends with your chief privacy officer. It can happen. Mistake number 4, not adjusting to the altitude. And as someone that has floated back and forth between management and IC, I'm really guilty of this one. Who here has ever tried to explain all the different phases of the MITRE attack framework to a board of directors? Oh yeah! Yes, and I say, sure, let's do it. Why not? Detection coverage, I think, is actually one of our better new metrics. But wow, we have done a bad job at explaining it at the leadership level. I have seen one of those MITRE attack heat maps, probably generated from a certain vendor, just slapped into a board of directors deck, as if it meant anything to them or told them anything. So we need metrics at every altitude. And the higher the altitude, the less it'll become about very technology specifics. And it'll become more about, how does this impact the business? And so it's helpful to think about it like a pyramid. For the business, the impact we make is reducing the cost of an incident or a breach, or how difficult and costly we make it to cause an incident or breach. And so our metric at the top of our pyramid, our North Star metrics, those are the ones that tell the business what and how we contribute. So mean time to detect. How long does it take for us to find out that there's a threat? And then how long does it take for us to get things contained? So maybe it's mean time to respond. Maybe it is just mean time to contained. Just that first part, especially because that's maybe all you can control. And then under that top layer is our coverage and effectiveness. Can we detect the top threats to the business? Do we have playbooks for the attacks that are most likely to happen? Do we have the visibility that we need? And then under that layer, how well do our tools perform? How much time do we end up spending trying to figure out what logs do I need and how long does it take for me to search? Organizing your metrics in a pyramid can help you connect the lower layers, those operational metrics, back up to your North Star metric, and then allow you to speak at the altitude that's appropriate to your audience. But organizing your metrics in a pyramid can also help you connect your metrics with the rest of the security organization, because it turns out detection and response is not the best strategy all the time. If your metrics are showing that your mean time to respond is trending up because of a repeating type of incident, sometimes the best way to reduce the cost isn't by improving your streamline metrics or your readiness metrics. It's telling other parts of the security org that, hey, maybe we should think about putting a control in place. And maybe you should drop what you're doing right now and do it. And now you can use your metrics to influence the rest of the security org and tell them what to do, because we're the most important. Mistake number 5, asking why instead of how. And my natural inclination is to ask why. Why didn't we detect that malware sooner? Why were we missing the firewall logs again? And as a dad, I have a lot of why questions. Why did we bring the car seat when we only took one taxi ride the entire trip? Why do we need 4 suitcases? Why didn't we bring the stroller? And why can't Liam walk by himself? But in all of those examples, why is not helping. So instead, I've learned, move straight to the how and start figuring out what actually needs to be done. And often, answering how helps you identify the underlying problem much faster and with a much more positive perspective, especially from your spouse. I mean coworker. How can I carry Liam, a car seat, and suitcases through the airport? How can I detect these type of threats sooner? How can we respond faster? When I interviewed with my current VP, she asked me, how do we build a modern detection and response program? How do we get there? That was like one question. Not a simple way to answer it. How do we describe where we are today, where we're going, and how we're going to get there? And it made me think about maturity models. And my first exposure to maturity models was the hunting maturity model. And the hunting maturity model, HMM, was really helpful when I needed to build a threat hunting program, when I just wanted to threat hunt. Because it told me, how do you figure out where you are? And it told me, how do I get the next level of maturity? What things need to be true? And maturity models give us as security practitioners this common language. So when I go and interview somewhere and we're talking about threat hunting, I can be like, where do you think you all are on like the hunting maturity model? And they usually know what I'm talking about. And they go, oh, well, we're here, and that's because of this. And maturity models they let us ask, where are we now? What tools and processes do we have? What's the current situation? What's the challenges? And where are we going? Where do we want to be by next year? And then how? How will we get there? What are our objectives? How are we going to achieve them? So I created a maturity model. It's called the Threat Detection and Response Maturity Model, TDR. And it builds off of HMM and it expands it across the different areas of detection and response. Now there's a lot to it. So at the end, I'll give you a link to the full maturity model that you can use. And the first pillar, when I thought about it, was observability, or having the tools and logs that we need to get visibility into our entities and user activities, and enriching it so we can contextualize that data, search it quickly. And then proactive threat detection, where we can focus on collecting our threat intel, prioritizing detections, and the hunts we perform. And then finally, rapid response, where we prepare our playbooks and automations so we can move from triage to analysis and then respond with the forensic capabilities that we need. And then we can use these 14 capabilities to describe and measure where we are today, where we want to go next, and how we get there. And for each of the 14 capabilities in the framework, you'll score yourself in 4 different areas: process, tools, documentation, and testing. And you'll rate them from initial all the way up to leading. And within the maturity model, there's very specific guidance for each of the capabilities, but there's some general guidance provided here as well. So for example, if we were to rate our detection engine capabilities, we can think about the processes we have. Do I have a process that tells me how to create a detection that looks for first-time occurrences? Do I have a process that defines the most optimal way for me to find my thresholds? And then we rate our tools. Are our detections managed from a central location? And then documentation. Or what's been the case for most of my career, the lack of. And then finally, testing. How do I validate that our logic to determine first-time occurrences is actually working? And as you go through each of the capabilities and rate them, I like to rate them individually. I like to sit down and really mull over it. And then we'll do it as a team, and we'll break out into groups, because that'll help you either think about the answers you gave, and if they're online, or if maybe you didn't consider some other things. And so doing it as a group exercise, it's a lot of fun. Make sure you write down why you rated things certain ways. That way when you come back to it, you're like, oh, that's right. That's why that was true. And then you can visualize it. And here's an example of how you can take your ratings and show at a high level where you are across those 3 pillars. And you could do specific metrics for each of those pillars too. And where you plan to be by some target date, say the end of the year, based on the projects that you planned and your initiatives. And I like to use this metric at the leadership level because it tells a story of where we are today, where we're going, and there's lots of underlying detail there if you need it, and you can also simple it. But I also like using it because it shows whether the work you're doing is having an impact on your maturity. So if you planned a whole bunch of projects and you look at this and you're like, well, nothing's moving, maybe rethink the projects you're planning and the work you're doing. But also, as an engineer, there's nothing better than being like, see how that's moving, that rapid response? That's work I'm working on. That's me. I'm doing that. So once you have a way of saying, hey, here's how we're going to mature, then you need some way to say, are we getting better though? Our capabilities are improving, we're maturing, but are we getting better? And that's where the SAVER framework can come back in again. And so for each metric you create, you'll put it into this structure here. Warning, when you do this with your current metrics, you may end up deleting all your metrics. So do it slowly. Avoid mistake number 1, losing sight of the goal. And ask, what question does this metric answer? What's the outcome you're looking to achieve? And use the SAVER categories to help you tie it back to your outcome and your North Star metrics. And then avoid mistake number 2, using quantities that lack controls. Make sure that you have metrics you can actually control. And don't forget to make it 0. Filter out what you can't control today so that when you look at a metric, you know exactly what it's telling you to go do something. And then if you have a control of a metric, what risks could that measurement reward? I was talking to a friend of mine, and he runs one of those really big SOCs, like the ones with the big room and the monitors all over the wall and the pew-pew maps. And I haven't been in one of these in a little bit, but they still have the pew-pew maps. That makes me very happy. And we were talking about metrics, and he was talking about the time to analyze metric. And it was a really big pain point in this SOC. And he told me, he said, analysis was taking a really long time. And they couldn't understand it. And so they brought it up to the team. They're like, hey guys, like the time to analyze metric, like it's really going up. We got to bring it down. And so guess what happened? the metric went down. They brought it down. And guess what else went down? Guess what other metric also went down? Quality went down. And then guess what went up? True positives missed. So when you introduce a new metric, think about, what potentially risky behavior may I be rewarding? Or, I have a bunch of smart engineers on this team, including myself. How will I try to, make this metric go the way I want it to do? Think about those things. We're smart people. You work with smart people. They're going to think of ways of improving the metric. Think of all the ways. And it might not be a bad metric, right? But you might want to create some companion metrics to go alongside it. Because remember, you will become what you measure. And then there's metric expiration. When will this metric not be needed anymore? When our only lever was alert tuning, sure, maybe it made sense to track alert volume. But now that a lot of the ways that we're reducing the time we're spending is through automation, maybe it's time we expire alert count metrics, or at least remove them from the leadership decks. Then you have your data requirements. How much data will this metric require? And then how much new effort will I need to improve this metric? You can make metrics all day long. You will be asked to make metrics. Can we make a metric for this? Your first question should be, do you want me to improve that metric? Because you make a new metric, you don't automatically get people to help you improve that metric. It's not how that works. And then how much time will it take to collect that metric? Don't come away from this talk telling people that Allyn said spend all your time making metrics. You won't be popular, and I don't want that coming back to me. Remember my mistake number 3, when I thought testing across 100% of the MITRE ATT&CK framework would give us the answer. And it was really cool. But think about the amount of data that you needed to get that to be a great metric and how long it took us to get there. You might not need to do all that. Think about the simpler metric that'll give you value today. And anytime I talk about metrics, I always get asked, but how do I change the bad metrics I'm already presenting today? What approach would I recommend? And I get it. Change is hard. Leadership does not like surprises, and they often have expectations that you'll be updating last month's slide deck. But I have one tip for you that's worked really well for me. Here, I have convinced my friend Dexter, he's still my friend, to get in near freezing water. And Dexter's first reaction was shock. His heart rate spiked. When his body hit the water, he gasped. Liam thought this was great. And he had to work to not hyperventilate. But then suddenly, clarity. And it's the same when you change your metrics. It's not going to be fun immediately. People are going to go into a state of shock, especially if those bad metrics have been around for a long time. They've gotten used to them. But my tip is, embrace it. Push through the change, and soon you'll have clarity too. So let's bring all these metrics together. And up front and center is our maturity using the TDR maturity model. And then we can use the saver categories to tell the story of our program. We're streamlining our operations by looking at what's taking the most time and automating it. We're looking at our threat intel and incident trends, and we're raising awareness about these top 5 threats. We've focused our time this quarter to build detections for these threats. Here's where we're tracking. We've been exploring gaps in security controls relevant to those top 5 threats. We found 3 new gaps. And from a readiness perspective, we have one type of reoccurring incident, really long recovery time, so we're working with our enterprise security team to implement new controls that will prevent those from happening. You'll notice, too, that I've only chosen one metric from each category. That's enough for now. I think when we make metrics, we think more is better, and it is definitely not better. Because you can't improve all those at one time. So choose the thing under each category that you would say, hey, you know what? If we were improving this right now, this would have the most impact. And keep that there until after a while you go, you know what? I think it's time we think about improving something else. We're doing pretty good here. So now, instead of making wild guesses about whether you're improving and if the tools you're buying are making any difference, you have the TDR maturity model to measure your capabilities. Instead of using volume counts, fear tactics, and tired emojis, you can use Savor to get to the core of your metric. Ask better questions and map that to something you can control. And instead of focusing on 100% MITRE attack coverage, much to your vendor's chagrin, you've focused on the threats that matter the most, found your top 5, and are working on detection coverage that has real impact. So hopefully, this is your wake-up call to take a cold plunge and rethink your detection and response metrics. Thank you very much. And real quick, this is my link tree. It's got my contact info. It's got a copy of the slide deck. And it has the complete TDR maturity model. I also write a severely infrequent newsletter called Meoward. It has an adorable cat that people love. The security info is decent. And I have cat stickers if you come see me at the end. And we have time for some questions. So if you have questions, go ahead, just shoot your hand up, and we'll go to those.
Do you depend on like sentiment of analysts or things like that for some of your metrics?
Ooh, sentiment. I like sentiment metrics, actually. You know what's funny? My team and I, we just had, we were just trying to choose what tool we wanted to use to solve a particular problem. We had some metrics about 2 tools, and we were looking at them, and they were really close. Like, everything kind of like looks the same, and we were like, they're both performing really well. And we were like, let's do a sentiment check. Or what you might want to even call like a joy check. Like, how much do we love or hate this thing? And we did a sentiment check, and they were not equal. It was like, yeah, this tool is great. It's doing all the right things. We hate this tool. It's terrible. We hate going into it. We hate interacting with it. We hate configuring it. Yes, it does all the things, but we hate it. I think sentiment is actually a really important metric. You could use it many different ways. Yeah, absolutely. Like sentiment on like a playbook, sentiment on an alert. Well, how do we feel about this alert? We hate it. All right. Well, that may be the most hated alert we should fix. Yes. Other great, not a completely sentiment, but slightly related. One of the best metrics I ever introduced, a response metric, is time spent arguing. It's awesome. We have somebody that basically is like the note taker for our incident, and they keep timestamps and all that. And we told them, like, argument starts, start the clock. How long did we spend arguing about it? I'll tell you what, one way to improve your response time is putting that metric up, because it's bold to put up on a leadership deck. Time spent arguing during an incident. I'll tell you what, the team that's the problem will slowly stop being the problem, because we're going to figure out which team it is. Because someone's going to go, can we break that down by team? I'll go, oh, we sure can. Any other questions? Yes. Yeah. I am a big fan of no surprises, even though I just showed you a photo of a cold plunge, which is that when we're working on a new metric, we get them through the whole team. We all look at them. We all agree on them. And then we take them to our sister teams, and we say, hey, we're working on this new metric. This is what we're thinking. This is what our new streamline metric's going to be. We're going to focus on this for the quarter. And then I show my boss, and then he shows his boss. And people have seen it before. The reality is like, when somebody has already seen it, they've asked the questions, then when you start using that metric, it's a lot easier. So I like to shop it around, get the feedback in, and then that way when it shows up on the deck and somebody didn't see it, then a lot of other people have already seen it. And they're like, no, it's great. Don't worry about it. Yes?
So how do you link the metrics to financial impact?
Financial impact. I love this. All right, so this is like V2 of the talk. that I'm working on. So I think that every incident we have, we can actually calculate what the cost could have been and then what the cost was. So there's a decent amount of data out there that tells us what different companies have experienced incidents that could have resulted of things that happen and what that cost was. Numbers are all over the place, but it gives you an idea. And if you take a lot of them, then you could be like, all right, it's based on some data. And then you can look at the incident you had and think about at what point did we stop it? How much time did it take us to stop it? How much, what's our budget cost per X? And then factor that in and say, here's how much it costs to have all these tools. This is how much it costs for this amount of time. This is how much it costs to have these engineers. And here's where we stopped it. And so maybe there's no cost, like no actual business cost to that incident. Or maybe the business cost is much smaller. Or maybe the business cost is really bad. And so now you have to rethink where your investments go. But I do think you could actually say, here's the incidents we had. Here's how much it costs the business for us to stop these and keep this cost where it's at. And here's how much, this is what the diff is. Every time I run those numbers, by the way, all you have to do is have like one incident that you stopped and your budget pays for itself. It's a reality. Like when you actually do the exercise, you'll find out, oh, actually, I don't need to do this for all of my incidents. I need to do it for like 3 of my incidents that went well, and I've paid for it all. And then you go ask for more money, and you start making more incidents on there. Yes. Don't give away all the secrets, though, all right? There's no CISOs or budget people in here, right? Yeah, there is. Uh-oh. Any other questions? Yeah.
So for the chief privacy officer tiers,
Yes.
is it better to measure that in volume or time spent crying?
I actually think that chief privacy officers cry a lot. And so you probably don't want to go by volume. What I think is helpful is maybe the salt content of the tiers. Yes. Well, thanks so much, everyone. I'll hang around in the back for a little bit and chat, but thanks so much for attending.